Hi, Luke Carlson of LS Carlson Law. Today I have with me my producer, Marty. Welcome.
Hello. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And, as we've been discussing, this is a very heavy way to start off the new year.
Yeah, this is New Year, first episode of the new year, coming out of the holidays, and you're thinking, okay, going to be a great year. We're going to get things rolling on a high. Everyone's excited. And we are 1 week in, and just north of us, there is 6,000 structures now that have been burned.
Yeah, absolute
wild
devastation. It's sort of beyond comprehension, the devastation that's happening. I have friends and family up in the area. They had to flee their homes.
Yeah.
And, obviously our heart goes out to everyone impacted by the fires. The first responders are doing tremendous work. I don't know if you've been seeing the footage of what they're dealing with, and they're fighting endlessly.
And firefighters not just in our state, other states are sending firefighters over too. And it is just, it's noble, and they are going in there and they are trying their darndest to help save every possible structure in human life. It is, it's a heavy topic of conversation.
Very heavy. And we were talking, we have a platform here, and I think looking at this platform, how can we be a resource?
Yeah.
How can we provide some information? And I think what we're going to be talking about today, it may not be relevant now. Right now people are trying to get out. They're trying to find a safe place.
Yeah.
But at some point there is going to be a rebuild. The fires will be contained. I believe that wholeheartedly.
It will.
And, a lot of the questions that we're already seeing, I think, are relevant just for when that time comes, because people are going to be in different spots with the rebuild. Some are going to be rebuilding sooner than others.
Yeah.
But I think if we can get the information out there, when it comes to associations, because a lot of the questions that we're already seeing involve, insurance, how the association, what is their relationship to the home, to the situation, and how best to start looking at it as a homeowner who's been devastated by the fires.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to do today.
Yeah. We had a lot of fun episodes scheduled. It's a shame that we're kicking it off this way, but a totally relevant topic that I think really needs some clarification.
I do too, because I think when you're looking at it, it's you're dealing with a lot initially, right? The home's been devastated, the community's been devastated.
Yeah.
What is a way to start looking at the situation in terms of a rebuild mindset? What are best practices? Yeah. And that's really what I think this today's show is, just to sort of start to frame it out a bit, empower those impacted, and hopefully be a resource of information.
And unfortunately, this fires, we live in Southern California, even here in Orange County, just south of the fires. We had one back in, what was it, August?
Yeah.
Where we had literal employees here that had to be evacuated from their homes.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It is wild. And, I don't think it's going away. As you know, I grew up in Florida, and, we were under constant threat of hurricanes during hurricane season. Something different about fires, though, is that, at least from my perspective, seeing the two forms of devastation, a hurricane, you see it coming. There's typically there's a good period of time, you're monitoring it. With these fires, especially in LA, they happen so quickly. I remember hearing of the fire and thinking, horrible, but hopefully it'll get contained.
Yeah.
And then just, an hour later, hearing 0% containment, just massive devastation.
Yeah, 10,000 acres. It's wild how fast, with the Santa Ana winds blowing at nearly 100 miles an hour, and it's dry as a bone.
Well, it hasn't. There's been no rain.
Yeah, we haven't had rain for a literal year. Yeah. A literal year.
Yeah, so it was a perfect recipe for this type of situation. So I guess looking at it, let's look at the associations.
Yeah.
Because what I would like to do is sort of address how it can be analyzed. If you're a homeowner and your community was impacted by a fire, what are some of the things we would look at from a legal perspective, and what they could start to look at? Obviously there's a huge insurance element or component to all of this, right?
For sure.
Looking to see whether or not, was your homeowner insurance policy, does it cover this type of disaster?
Yep.
What happens with the insurance company if they deny the claim? This really isn't meant to go into bad faith denials or anything sort of in that world.
Yeah.
Because that is that could be 17 topics or 17 episodes just on bad faith insurance denials. What I'd rather look at is a community and, did the community follow best practices?
Yeah.
And often the analysis starts with common areas.
Sure.
Because, this isn't the first time we've seen, this is the most devastating fire by far. But I have seen situations where smaller fires have impacted communities.
Yeah.
And typically the first thing we look at is common area and whether or not the association took or engaged in any sort of preventative measures leading up to the fire.
Sure.
And often what that looks like is, common areas, green belts that weren't maintained properly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's a lot of HOA. If you look at just Southern California as a whole, it's very hilly.
Right.
There's mountainous regions, but there's also a lot of cliffs, a lot of hills, and a lot of slopes.
Right.
Most all of Orange County, someone has a slope in their own yard, let alone in the community
with brush.
Yeah,
right.
This is the type of native species that is there. That's what we cut down to put the houses there, and literally they're coming back there with vengeance.
Right. So one of the things we often look at first is what were sort of the preventative measures leading up to a fire.
Yeah.
Right. Did the association, were they proactive? And were they in a fire zone, and were they put on notice?
Yeah.
Now, really good associations, and there's a lot of them out there, especially in fire zones, will have yearly cleanups.
Yeah.
They'll actually get the fire department out and sort of inspect the common areas. And for the association, they have a fiduciary to protect, maintain.
Yeah.
It's derived also from the CC&Rs, which is a contractual obligation.
Yeah.
So best practices are to be very proactive, especially if you're in a fire zone.
Yeah.
Now, if you're in an association where the association has been put on notice, the board's been put on notice. Hey, this is a risk. This is a danger. We've had clients who have actually secured their own experts, and those experts have presented reports saying, hey, this green belt is a massive danger. That was very proactive from the homeowner, but it's not. I don't think it's unreasonable given California and our.
So you're saying that the client, or you've had it come up where the homeowner themselves within the community is worried about the green belt,
condition absolutely.
It's overgrown, and they are not heard at a board meeting. So they get an outside expert to come in and look at this, say, yeah, this is a problem, and they still don't do something about it. Obviously, that can be problematic when you literally stack the tinder next to these homes.
Correct. And so, you're looking at a very proactive homeowner, but the homeowner then can use that very strategically and in a very powerful way to compel and force an HOA to act.
Yeah.
That report is worth its weight in gold.
Yeah.
But, if you have a board that has ignored those reports and it was actually hit by a fire, I think then the question really becomes is whether or not those preventative measures would have had an impact.
Sure.
That's really the analysis at that point. Because if you look at these fires, they were so devastating, they were so overwhelming that it's quite possible that best practices across the board would not have mattered.
Right.
Right. And so that's, I think, really the analysis here.
Yeah.
If you're looking at a community that was hit by the fire and let's say it was destroyed, worst case scenario, eventually an expert's going to come in and say, hey, even if the board did follow the protocols, even if they had experts come out and clear out all the brush and sort of deployed best practices, this still would have been a complete loss. Yeah. That's sort of scenario one. Alternatively, you could get an expert in and say, if this green belt was properly maintained, this never would have happened. So that's really what we're looking at from a legal perspective. And then the other thing, too, I think is important is looking at the infrastructure of the community. Did the infrastructure allow for first responders to access it? Yeah. Right?
I mean, you live in a community. I know there's usually one main gate, sometimes two main gates, but then there's several, if not one or two, three backup gates that are fire access, because you can't just have one choke point for fire department. are those being maintained? I mean, it's easy for the homeowners to complain about the main gate not opening because you literally come home one day and you're like, I can't get through into my house. That's easy to complain about. That's easy to have a problem with maintenance. But what about the fire gates? I mean, you don't need them until you really need them.
Correct. And that, again, goes to this maintenance duty of an association and the duty to inspect.
Yeah.
You know, a good association is constantly making sure that the back gates work. Everything is functioning.
Yeah.
You know, and the question is, does a first responder have easy access? Right?
Yeah.
Or is it broke? Is it inoperable? And if it's inoperable, that becomes a massive problem for the association.
Yeah.
So on a very high level, that's sort of the starting point of some of this analysis, right?
Yeah.
The other part too, and again, I don't want to get too much into the insurance part of it, but is looking at, did the HOA have proper insurance? Were they covered?
Yeah.
You know, for the common areas. You know,
so like the pool house burns down.
Pool house burns down, tennis courts burn down, green belts burn down, or the infrastructure, the roads are destroyed.
Yeah.
Everything needs to be rebuilt. So, you know, again, I don't want to go too deep into all of this right now. The goal here today was really to, you know, have our listeners who were impacted start to get a general sense of what they could be looking at.
Yeah.
You know, you're looking at old board meetings. Did someone bring this up historically?
Yeah.
Did they bring it up historically? Was there email communication to the board notifying them, hey, this is a real big problem? And if there was that paper trail and the board did nothing, then really the question becomes, would that have mattered?
Right.
Right. So I think it's sort of presenting at least sort of a complete holistic way of looking at the situation.
Yeah.
And hopefully empower our listeners to be able to analyze and properly digest, you know.
Well, we go back to if this is a problem now and God forbid something happens to your house or anyone's house in an association and it did get brought up, make sure you collect the evidence of this stuff. Make sure you preserve your emails and everything that you have that can potentially help you out in the long haul. Because unfortunately, oh my gosh, I can only imagine it's devastating to think about the long haul that these poor people are going to have to deal with.
It's going to be tremendous.
It's the potentially rebuild, years.
Absolutely years to rebuild from this. And then also, I think it's a good wake-up call for other associations, you know, that weren't impacted.
Yeah.
And, from my perspective at this point, it's historically been so crystal clear how horrible these fires can be, how devastating, the massive impact. This just reaffirms that, right? In a very massive way. I mean, this is the largest fire we've ever dealt with, I think, historically speaking.
Well, I think that, you look back at the fire that happened, the airport fire in Orange County. I'm not sure if there was any like homes lost on that particular fire. There might have been a couple, but not of note.
Right.
And that fire was massive. It went all the way from, Silverado Canyon all the way back to Riverside County.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a massive fire, big fire in terms of the amount of burn and acreage that it took up. But in terms of the home devastation, it was relatively small
relative to LA.
Relative to LA.
Yeah.
LA is on a scale that is like it's unheard of.
Right.
To see how many, I think they were saying 6,000 structures were reported either at I don't think they were burned, but they were at possibility of getting burned. They were threatened. That was the word I was looking for. But we still have lots of structures now that have already been burned at this point. So we're talking. I hate to say it, but if you look back at using Florida as an example, the Seaside Tower, it took massive. Such a horrible, a tower that literally fell in our modern lifestyle,
modernized
modernized world with modernized building codes, and this thing falls.
Right.
You can't comprehend that, but it took that sort of devastation. Now look at what Florida has. Their response to it has been just going back to objective.
It's a different state. Afterwards,
it is one of our most viewed episode here had to do with the 2024 changes in the laws.
Right.
Most of those laws were the catalyst of those laws were Seaside.
Yeah.
It was that, and many of those things were...
Well, it was a wake-up call to
to
the government there, and it really put such a spotlight on, hey, really bad association or mismanagement, it can impact not only property, it impacts lives in such a real way.
Yep.
And, I think maybe what you're getting at is this will have the same impact.
It could. I mean, I could see this being such a devastating event like Seaside. You can't help but think that legislation maybe in the near future will be passed to ensure that brush is, it could hold HOA's feet to the fire, just like it did in Seaside, where building codes and new codes must be held to account. Right. That the same thing might happen with associations here in California in terms of maintaining.
Hope, instead of, and that would be wonderful. Listen, sure. I think the more proactive we can be, the better. But if you look at the associations now, it's the homeowners who can start to put pressure on their associations to ensure best practices are followed. If let's say they weren't impacted, let's say they're in San Diego or Orange County or outside of the LA, right?
Yeah.
To see this and say, you know what, we do need to be proactive. We do need to start maintaining the common area. We should get an expert out to assess whether or not we're at a fire risk. What are best practices?
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping an association from being proactive
You
right
are 100% right. This should be a wake-up call to all associations to call a meeting and say, okay, what can we do?
Are we following best practices?
Are we following best practices? What can we do better? And take it from there.
Right. And ultimately, it's an investment of time. You're going to have to pay for the reports. You'll pay for cleanup. But in the long term, it is a big win for the community.
But God forbid anything ever happens, too.
Correct.
You've dotted the I's and crossed the T's and did everything that you could to preserve the community.
Protect the community.
And ultimately, these are run by the homeowners themselves.
Correct. So it behooves everyone to act together. So hopefully, a lot of good comes from this very devastating situation.
Yeah.
In terms of, future protection, because this was a failure on so many levels. And so, hopefully a lot of the communities who were not impacted can be more proactive, can look at this and say, hey, you know what, this is a wake-up call. We need to take this much more seriously.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those things where, it's not a problem until it is a problem. And then when it is a problem, it's a very huge problem. It's massive.
The other thing is that for the homeowners that have been knocking at the door of the association saying that there is a problem,
this might be the time to
ratchet it up.
Yep.
Like it's time. We've given some really great tools by way of IDR and ways that you can get them to respond, or a more tactful approach of getting them to respond.
Right.
Maybe now's the time to enforce your rights and ratchet
Put
that
a little
up.
pressure on the association. I couldn't agree more. And then also, what I also want to articulate here, and maybe we can put it up on the podcast, is I know a lot of companies are coming in to also assist the displaced homeowners. I know Airbnb is offering relocation assistance. Uber Eats, if I'm not mistaken, is put in some resources as well. So again, the idea of this show, I really wanted to identify at least some ways that a homeowner impacted could look at this. Hopefully, encourage other associations to be more proactive. And then on the show, too, maybe we can put up some information regarding relocation assistance as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of great I was just looking at this yesterday, and there's an article of how you can help, and it's Red Cross. It's for displaced pets. There's a lot of great resources.
Let's put that up as well.
We'll link that up and make sure that people have a resource there as well.
And I think that was really the goal of this podcast. What I want to do too is encourage everyone who's listening to put up, if there's additional information, if we can be a resource, let us know. Because we have a lot of information at our disposal, and if we can even present some sort of helpful and useful guidance, we're all for that. So
the comments, we do look at the comments, and we do our best to actively respond to all those comments. We will be on those like a hawk for the next several weeks on the episode to make sure that any good questions, and maybe we do a follow-up on those, like an Ask Me Anything, basically, that came out of those comments of this episode, and we can kind of readdress it at that point as well. So
I agree.
This is just a preliminary overview a couple things that you can do. But heart goes out to those people out there.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.